The clinking of champagne flutes, a sound usually associated with celebration, felt like a dissonant chime against the cavernous echo of my own discomfort. The forced laughter of distant colleagues, a brittle veneer of camaraderie, acted as a personal taunt, each peal a subtle jab that landed just beneath my skin. I found myself drawn to the edge of the room, seeking refuge by a tall, imposing window. The glass was cool against my cheek, a meager offering of solace against the suffocating heat that seemed to emanate from the press of bodies and the stifled ambition swirling in the air. I pressed my forehead against the pane, willing a sliver of cool air to penetrate the oppressive atmosphere, my gaze lost in the blurry tapestry of city lights twinkling beyond the condensation that fogged the glass. I wished, with a desperation that surprised me, that I was anywhere but here. This was supposed to be a promotion dinner, a celebratory affair ostensibly designed to acknowledge and applaud the team's collective success. But the subtext, the unspoken narrative, was about me. My ascent. I had poured every ounce of my being into this project, sacrificing sleep, weekends, and a significant portion of my social life. I had navigated the treacherous currents of office politics, a landscape riddled with subtle betrayals and veiled criticisms, emerging, against all odds, victorious. I had anticipated a handshake, perhaps a word of genuine commendation from Mr. Harrison, my boss. Instead, I found myself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, and not in a way that felt empowering or affirming. Honestly, Brenda, I just don't understand how she landed this promotion. Janice's voice, sharp and laced with an almost theatrical incredulity, cut through the ambient murmur. Janice, a woman whose ambition was as transparent and overpowering as her signature cheap perfume, made sure her pronouncement carried, reaching the ears of at least half the room. It certainly couldn't have been solely on her actual work ethic. My breath hitched in my throat, a sharp, involuntary intake of air. I knew Janice. I was intimately familiar with her subtle barbs, her carefully constructed critiques that always seemed to pinpoint any perceived vulnerability. But this was a direct assault, a blatant disregard for the hours I'd invested, the challenges I'd overcome. It was an attack on the very foundation of my achievement. Then came Mark, his voice smooth and deceptively polite, a veneer that barely concealed the simmering resentment I'd sensed from him for months. He had a way of speaking to me, a condescending tone that implied I was perpetually in his debt, even when he was offering nothing but platitudes. "Well, you know how it is," he chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound that scraped against my nerves. "Some people just have connections. A little bit of external support can go a long way." He paused, letting the implications settle like dust. "Her fiancé, isn't he quite well off? Makes things considerably easier when you're not constantly worried about making rent." For a beat, the room seemed to hold its breath. The cacophony of whispers that had been circulating, previously indistinct murmurs, suddenly coalesced into a single, damning accusation. Gold digger. The word, unspoken but palpable, hung in the air, a heavy stain on my reputation. My fiancé. Yes, Liam was wealthy. Excessively so. It was a fact we rarely, if ever, discussed. I actively avoided bringing it up, not out of shame, but out of a fervent desire for our relationship to be judged on its own intrinsic value, not on the size of his bank account. I did not need his money. My career, my achievements, were mine and mine alone. Mr. Harrison, a man whose usual affability bordered on genuine warmth, appeared momentarily flustered. He offered me a hesitant, almost apologetic smile. "Ah, yes. Well, Brenda does come from a comfortable background, that's true. But her contributions to the project were, as we all know, quite undeniable. Let's perhaps not dwell too much on personal matters tonight." His words, intended to douse the flames of their insinuation, served only to fan them. By acknowledging my comfortable background, he had, in effect, tacitly endorsed their assumption. The unspoken message resonated with brutal clarity. My success was not entirely self-made, it had been, at least in part, facilitated by my association with Liam. The celebratory atmosphere now felt hollow, tainted by a pervasive sense of injustice. A hot flush crept up my neck, a primal urge to scream, to defend myself, to recount every single late night, every sacrificed weekend, every moment of doubt and struggle that had culminated in this promotion. But I held my tongue. I managed a tight, brittle smile, a mask I had perfected over years of navigating such situations, and excused myself, murmuring something about needing a moment. The restroom beckoned. Behind the closed, mirror door, I shed cold water on my face, the icy shock a welcome contrast to the heat churning within me. The reflection staring back was that of a stranger, pale, drawn, her eyes holding a flicker of something I didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't pure anger, not the explosive kind. It was a cold, simmering resolve, a quiet determination hardening within me. They wanted to define me by my circumstances, by my associations? Fine. They wanted to paint me as someone riding on Liam's coattails? Let them. I would simply demonstrate, with quiet precision, how misguided their assumptions were. I walked back out, the conversation having mercifully shifted to safer, less personal terrain. I rejoined the periphery of the gathering, accepting the perfunctory congratulations with the same tight smile, the same carefully curated pleasantness. I even raised my champagne flute, clinking it gently with Liam's. He beamed, utterly oblivious to the venom that had been so casually spewed in my direction. He had arrived late, as was his habit, and I had consciously decided not to burden him with the ugliness of my workplace politics. The remainder of the evening dissolved into a blur of forced smiles and superficial pleasantries. I endured the patronizing pats on the back, the thinly veiled questions that probed the edges of my personal life, my wedding plans, Liam's business ventures. Each word, each inquiry, felt like a tiny prick, a cumulative accumulation of discomfort that settled into a dull, persistent ache. The following morning, armed with a plan forged in the quiet solitude of the restroom, I walked into the office. It wasn't a grand, theatrical gesture. It was subtle, precise, and, I suspected, would prove to be deeply satisfying. My first target was Janice. Janice, I began, my voice steady, deliberately cutting through the low hum of morning office activity. I happened to overhear your comments last night at the dinner. I understand you may have some reservations regarding my promotion. I wanted to take this opportunity to clarify that while I deeply appreciate Liam's support in my personal life, my career is unequivocally my own. I have worked incredibly hard for this, and I am, frankly, disheartened that my contributions were so readily dismissed. Janice sputtered, her carefully constructed composure faltering. Her face, usually a shade too flushed from her perfume, paled noticeably. I didn't mean. I know, I interrupted, my tone remaining even, devoid of any overt aggression. However, the implications of your words were undeniably clear. And it is, to say the least, disheartening to know that my colleagues perceive my success as something I have not genuinely earned. With Janice momentarily silenced, I turned my attention to Mark. Mark, you mentioned my fiancé's wealth making things easier. You are absolutely correct, I conceded, leaning slightly forward. It makes things easier in the sense that I do not have to contend with unexpected bills or constant financial pressures that could potentially distract me from my work. This allows me to dedicate my full energy and unwavering focus to my career, which, as you are well aware, has been my primary objective for a very long time. I let that sink in, allowing the weight of my words to settle. Unlike some, I added, my gaze steady, I have the distinct luxury of being able to pour 110% into my professional development without the perpetual stress of financial insecurity. It's a different kind of advantage, perhaps, but an advantage nonetheless. My carefully chosen words hung in the air, a stark and unassailable contrast to his insinuations. I wasn't denying Liam's wealth, I was strategically reframing it, positioning it as a tool that enabled my ambition, a tool he, by his own admission, seemed to lack. The real impact, however, manifested itself later that week when Mr. Harrison summoned me to his office. I knew, as I sat across from him, that he was still processing the events of the promotion dinner. He began with a hesitant preamble, an awkward preamble about team dynamics and office harmony. Brenda, he started, shuffling a stack of papers with more vigor than necessary. Regarding last night. I wanted to assure you, unequivocally, that your promotion was based entirely on merit. Your work on the Peterson account was, quite frankly, exceptional. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I replied, meeting his gaze directly, my voice calm and assured. I appreciate you saying that. However, I also wanted to share something that might provide some additional context for any perceived advantages, as Mr. Davies so delicately put it. I didn't produce a spreadsheet or a detailed financial statement. Instead, I simply stated, my paternal grandparents established a trust for me several years ago, upon their passing. It is, I must admit, quite substantial, and it ensures my complete financial independence. Liam and I are very much equals in our financial lives, though his wealth is, as you know, considerably more visible. My trust fund, however, is a private matter that I have always kept separate from my professional life. It is not something I have ever used to my advantage in the workplace, nor would I ever consider doing so. I watched as his eyes widened, the carefully constructed edifice of his assumptions crumbling before my eyes. He hadn't anticipated this. He, like Janice and Mark, had so readily assumed my association with Liam was the sole reason for any perceived ease in my life. The notion of a pre-existing, independent fortune was clearly disarming. It shifted the entire narrative, turning their assumptions on their heads. It wasn't that I was with a rich man, it was that I was independently wealthy, and Liam was simply an added, and welcome, bonus. The fallout wasn't immediate or dramatic. There were no public apologies issued, no dramatic firings enacted. Instead, there was a palpable, almost imperceptible shift in the office dynamic. Janice, for weeks, avoided eye contact, her usual smarmy condescension replaced by a nervous, almost fearful deference. Mark, who had always operated under the assumption that I was a dependent, someone whose time was readily available for minor tasks, suddenly found himself on the receiving end of my quiet authority. He'd often try to delegate minor tasks to me, assuming, with his prior understanding, that I had the time and inclination. Now, I'd calmly respond, Mark, I'm swamped with the sterling proposal. Perhaps you could handle that yourself? The unspoken implication, loud and clear, was that I had far more important things to manage, things that were genuinely mine to oversee. Mr. Harrison's demeanor also underwent a transformation. His smiles became more genuine, his questions about my work more respectful and inquisitive. He even mentioned, in a brief, passing comment, that he regretted how the promotion dinner had unfolded. The whispers, of course, did not cease entirely. Gossip, after all, is like a persistent weed that thrives in the fertile ground of office politics. But the tone had undeniably changed. The accusatory edge was gone, replaced by a grudging respect, even a touch of awe. They no longer saw me as a woman using a wealthy fiancé to gain an advantage, but as a woman who was already secure, a woman who had actively chosen this career path out of genuine passion and talent, not out of any perceived necessity. I continued to excel in my role, my performance serving as a constant, irrefutable testament to the fact that the promotion had been thoroughly deserved. Liam remained my loving partner, and our life together was a quiet sanctuary, a space where our shared affection and mutual respect were the only currencies that truly mattered. But the memory of that dinner, of their judgmental eyes and whispered accusations, remained. It served as a potent reminder that some people are all too quick to judge, eager to diminish others based on their own limited perceptions and ingrained biases. And, perhaps more importantly, it was a reminder that sometimes, the most profound justice isn't about grand pronouncements or public shaming, but about the quiet, unassuming unfolding of truth, a truth that renders their flimsy assumptions utterly, and satisfyingly, irrelevant.